AEW drops new CM Punk merchandise amid rumors of his AEW exit. We've got an update on Colt Cabana's return to AEW and what it could mean for the former Ring of Honor World Tag Team Champion going forward. Speaking of returns, the Elite are on their way back to AEW. We've got an update on their possible pay-per-view return at Full Gear. Matt Hardy also defends the Elite in their backstage brawl against CM Punk and Ace Steel. Jeff Jarrett is All Elite. We've got an update on his AEW debut this past Wednesday and his director role moving forward. Chris Jericho, what's his new role specifically backstage in AEW? Shibata makes his AEW in-ring debut tonight on Rampage. We've got an update on his potential matches moving forward. We've got the ratings for Dynamite on Wednesday night. Rick Ross was in AEW this week. Could anything happen with him moving forward in the company? Ricky Starks is on his way back to AEW tonight on Rampage. We've got the reason why he's been absent. And Bandido, is he or isn't he All Elite? Hey guys, welcome back to Wrestling News 365. Hope everyone is doing very well. As always, there are plenty of news stories to get into in the world of All Elite Wrestling. You just saw that intro. We've got so many stories to get into. Let's start off talking about CM Punk. Obviously, talking about CM Punk so much at the moment, the former two-time AEW World Champion, as we get closer and closer and closer, possibly to Punk exiting the company, possibly returning to WWE. He's on the shelf at the moment, but there is so much drama surrounding the Second City Savior. And even though all signs point to CM Punk's inevitable AEW exit, the promotion has actually released new Punk merchandise featuring the former two-time AEW World Champion. The Shop AEW website dropped its new Holiday 2022 ornament series recently, and a limited edition CM Punk 2.5-inch round glass ornament is one of the featured items. Yes! We're looking at Christmas ornaments as a side of if someone's going to be with the company. As per the listing, though, only 200 items are up for sale. Punk's new merch is presently featured under the new arrivals section on the homepage of Shop AEW, alongside similar ornaments of Sting, the Young Bucks, Adam Cole, AEW World Champion Jon Moxley, Dr. Britt Baker, FTR, and Danhausen. It was widely reported that Punk and AEW are currently negotiating a contract buyout, which would bring to an end Punk's short-lived stint with the promotion. The veteran wrestler is currently sidelined, of course, with a torn triceps injury, on top of being kept off television for his role in the infamous backstage brawl at the All Out pay-per-view back in September. Even if Punk were to return to AEW programming, he'd be unlikely to do so anytime before mid-2023 per several reports because of this injury. On Wednesday, and we're going to talk about this quite a lot in detail in just a second, on Wednesday, AEW brought back Punk's friend turned foe Colt Cabana to AEW Dynamite for a match against Ring of Honor World Champion Chris Jericho. Several reports noted that Cabana's return was a confirmation from AEW that Punk was indeed done with the company. Furthermore, a report from Fightful Select has suggested that Cabana's return was a, quote, huge signal to WWE that Punk was indeed gone from AEW, with one source close to Punk and Cabana ruling out the possibility of the two men ever working together again. Shortly before Punk's expletive-filled tirade at All Out in the post-show media scrum, several outlets reported that Cabana was being kept off of AEW television due to Punk, something that Punk has vehemently denied. Now, speaking of Cabana, we've got an update on the reaction to his return this Wednesday on Dynamite. We've got an update on what his role could be in AEW going forward, what it meant for CM Punk as well. So this is quite interesting. A report from Fightful Select Sean Ross Sapp suggests that several within All Elite Wrestling are very happy that Colt Cabana is back. The dozen or so talent that Sean Ross Sapp and Fightful heard back from regarding the November 2nd AEW Dynamite were in support of Colt Cabana being back in the fold. There was natural inquisition as to the possibility of reinforcing the long-standing rumor that Cabana was removed from television because of Punk, whether it was vehemently, whether it was requested by Punk or not, which of course, as I mentioned, Punk vehemently denied. Before Cabana's absence, Fightful were told that he'd seemed incredibly happy and had been helping producing matches for months before he left. WrestleVotes tweeted on November 3rd, which was yesterday, Colt Cabana showing up on Dynamite didn't go unnoticed in Stamford, something we touched on earlier today. Those that Fightful have spoken to were saying that seemed like a huge signal to WWE that if Punk wasn't finished with AEW before, he certainly would be now. One source within WWE that was familiar with both Punk and Cabana said they'd be shocked if the two worked together ever again, as I just mentioned. A WWE source said they hadn't heard anything even resembling an update on the relationship between Punk and WWE, and that they wouldn't feel comfortable officially reaching out to him considering the situation, and WWE frankly are right to, because it's still very, very shaky ground with if they're actually legally allowed to talk to him, because I guess whilst they're still negotiating a buyout of his contract, he's still technically under contract to AEW, so there's not really a lot that they can do. Cabana has, since he made his return on Wednesday, has commented on his return to television, saying on Twitter, quotes, "I returned to national television last night on AEW. I love wrestling." He may love wrestling and he may love AEW, but we've got an update on his future and the reason actually as to why Tony Khan brought him back to television. As I mentioned, Fightful Select, Sean Rossap reported that a dozen or so AEW talents reached out to talk of their support for Cabana being back in the fold. However, Dave Meltzer has followed up on that report in the latest Wrestling Observer newsletter, saying that Cabana's appearance on Dynamite was for the locker room rather than a shot at CM Punk, with Cabana noted to be very popular with the AEW talent. Cabana's disappearance from AEW TV was said by some to potentially appease CM Punk due to that long-standing animosity between the two sides of their lawsuit against former WWE Dr. Chris Arman, although Punk, as I mentioned, has denied anything to do with that, anything to do with him being removed from television, with Meltzer saying the decision to bring Cabana back to Dynamite was a Tony Khan idea. Now, again, when it comes to his future with AEW, it would appear that his return to Dynamite was something of a one-off. He faced Jericho for the Ring of Honor World Championship on Wednesday. He lost the match to Jericho following a code breaker from the Ocho. Now, while some hope Cabana would be sticking around in AEW, that won't be the case, according to Mike Johnson of PW Insider, who reported that the two-time Ring of Honor World Tag Team Champions appearance is currently planned to just be a one-off. His return was simply done so Chris Jericho could be another Ring of Honor talent on his quest to being crowned the greatest Ring of Honor World Champion of all time. Cabana remains part of the Ring of Honor roster, though, as was the case when he re-signed with AEW in the first place. You recall, the expectation was that he'd be on his way out of AEW because of the CM Punk situation, and then at the very last minute, he signed a contract extension with Tony Khan, but it was specifically for Ring of Honor. So whilst Cabana's appearance in AEW is a one-off, he still will be, I guess, moving forward with Ring of Honor moving forward, and he seemingly will be a regular performer if and when the promotion does secure a television deal. The next Ring of Honor pay-per-view will be Final Battle on December 10. Chances are he'll have something to do with that. Some speculation, as I mentioned, was suggested that Cabana's return was to tweak CM Punk. Cabana and Punk have had long-standing issues, of course, and earlier this year, Punk was involved in Tony Khan's initial plans not to renew Cabana's contract and his subsequent banishment of Ring of Honor. Both Khan and Punk denied that was the case, but Cabana resurfacing on AEW television as Punk appears to be done with the company only fueled talk about that as the week went on. Now, what was quite interesting when it comes to CM Punk as well is that Tony Khan in a recent interview did actually mention CM Punk by name, and a lot of people raised their eyebrow up at that. Punk was referenced by Tony Khan in an interview on Busted Open Radio earlier this week, talking about the history of Ring of Honor. Tony Khan said, quote, "We've demonstrated the great history of the championship, the Ring of Honor championship. Of course, Chris Jericho is the champion now, but there have been a lot of great Ring of Honor champions. Some of the big names that have held the title and some of the great former champions include AJ Styles, Samoa Joe, CM Punk, Claudio Castagnoli, Cody Rhodes, Kevin Owens, and many others. So a lot of great wrestlers across Ring of Honor and people in AEW, people in WWE, New Japan, all over the world have held that bout. And it's really one of the most prestigious title lineages in all of wrestling." Now, what's quite interesting about him referencing Punk there is Stephen Mulhausen of DAZN reported that the moment, quote, "wasn't an accident." This is what he had to say, quote, "Sources confirmed PW Insider's report that Colt Cabana's appearance on AEW Dynamite was nothing more than a one-off. Also told it wasn't a shot at CM Punk, who was brought up yesterday by Tony Khan on Busted Open, and that wasn't an accident." Now, I think what they're trying to imply there is that still the relationship between AEW and CM Punk is cordial at best, and whilst the perception of bringing Cabana back to AEW television could be perceived as a shot at CM Punk, it wasn't. It was just part of the storyline. It was just another Ring of Honor name for Chris Jericho to beat, and as proof that things are technically okay between AEW and CM Punk is that Tony Khan mentioned him on Busted Open Radio. I struggle to believe that, honestly. I know people will say, well, it's just, it's a big former Ring of Honor name that Jericho beat. It was a message. You don't, come on. It's in the same way that, I didn't realize CM Punk was being fired on his wedding day. I had no idea about that when WWE did it. Oh, no, that's got nothing to do with CM Punk. Let's not be silly here. Come on. Now, speaking of CM Punk, of course, one of the issues and reasons that he's suspended at the moment is because he had this big brawl with the Elite. So we've got an update on the Elite's return to AEW. Of course, the Elite have not been on any All Elite Wrestling programming since the All Out pay-per-view on September 4, but Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks look to be getting closer and closer to a return. The three men have been backstage at recent tapings of AEW Dynamite, and vignettes have aired on TV in recent weeks teasing a return and a possible match with Death Triangle for the AEW World Trios Championships. In an update, Dave Meltzer of the Wrestling Observer newsletter reported that the Elite versus Pac, Rey Fenix, Penta, El Zero Miedo was probable but not 100% for the Full Gear pay-per-view on Saturday, November 19. If the match were to take place at the pay-per-view, the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega would ultimately have to return in the next couple of weeks to build up to the match, or certainly the match would have to be announced in the next couple of weeks. Maybe they make their return at the pay-per-view. Omega and the Bucks were the inaugural AEW World Trios champions, winning the gold at All Out, but they were stripped of the titles only days later following their involvement in the backstage fight with CM Punk and Ace Steel after the September pay-per-view. All five men were suspended, and a third-party investigation has since ended, seemingly siding with the Elite's version of events. Now, Matt Hardy was on his podcast this week and actually defended the Elite and their recollection and their side of things, and actually backed their behavior in comparison to CM Punk. Now, he was asked about the situation, and he said, "It's going to be very interesting to see the Elite back, the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega. I'm very happy they are back. I will say this right here and right now. Those guys didn't do anything wrong in this situation. If anything, they were the victims. I'm telling you that from a first-person perspective. I was there. I witnessed it all. I love all those three guys. I've known Matt and Nick forever. I've just gotten to know Kenny while working with AEW. I'm very happy they are returning to TV and they are back in the mix. They deserve to be in the mix. When I saw them yesterday, I said, it's so good to see you guys. You guys are the heart and soul of AEW. The Elite, in many ways, are the identity of AEW. Without those guys, you don't have an AEW as it is right now. Things are very different. Tony Khan may have started wrestling in some capacity, but All Elite Wrestling, those guys are the identity of AEW. It's very important to have them back." Now, Hardy, since then, has actually clarified his comments on the podcast, because, as is the case when you talk about this topic, it gained a lot of traction on social media. Here's what Hardy had to say on Twitter. Quote, "My comments from this week's Matt Hardy podcast have been misconstrued. I was not at All Out 2022. I did not say I witnessed the events at All Out. I witnessed the entire process in real time over the months and stand by my comments that the Elites were not in the wrong." So Matt Hardy seemingly backing up the Elite there. Now, when it comes to the Elite as well, there was some conversation as to, were they backstage? Were they present at this week's edition of AEW Dynamite? Of course, last week they were present backstage when their first teaser of their return dropped. And Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks were in fact spotted backstage, according to PW Insider. Of course, the trio still hasn't been on AEW programming since the infamous all-out problem with CM Punk, although the last couple of weeks AEW has been showing some cryptic vignettes implying that the Elite's place in AEW history is being erased. So, as I mentioned, they were backstage this past week at AEW Dynamite, and I guess the assumption would be that they'll be back definitely for Full Gear. It's just a case of when that match gets announced, and the chances are they'll be facing Death Triangle to try and recapture those AEW World Trios Championships. Now, on Wednesday, we saw Jeff Jarrett become All Elite to make his AEW debut on Dynamite, and during a packed edition of Dynamite that saw everything from Shibata to Rick Ross making appearances, we'll touch on that later on, all the talk was really, the majority anyway, was about this AEW debut of Jeff Jarrett, as Double J hit Darby Allin with the guitar shot before revealing he was in cahoots with Jay Lethal, Sanjay Dutt, and the company. AEW President Tony Khan later announced that Jeff Jarrett was officially All Elite and was signed on as the Director of Business Development, with a new report from PW Insider potentially shedding some light on Jarrett's hiring with the company. The report suggests that Jarrett was brought into AEW in part due to his experience with overseas markets, with Jarrett running Ring Ka King and forging TNA TV deals in India, whilst TNA's successful expansion into the UK was also notably whilst Jarrett was the driving force behind the company. AEW President Tony Khan has long teased international touring dates for AEW, with a UK debut at Fulham's Craven Cottage Stadium talked about by the company on multiple occasions. As for Jarrett's on-screen role, it seems as although all roads are leading to some sort of Sting versus Jarrett match, with the likelihood of Sting teaming up with Darby Allin and facing off against Jarrett and Jay Lethal. That looks to be the direction that they're going in. But with this discussion about Jarrett being brought in as a director of live events of sorts, does this mean that we're going to start to see AEW house shows on a regular basis, similar to how WWE also runs house shows. Now, since their inception, AEW has shied away, of course, from running house shows, with the promotion having only ran one house show in their history. However, a report from Dave Meltzer in the Wrestling Observer newsletter suggests that there is some talk of AEW talents actually wanting to work house shows for the company. It's been said that part of Jeff Jarrett's new role as the Director of Business Development could include the possibility of helping AEW run these aforementioned house shows, although there has been no official word whether AEW do actually plan to run such events or not. Meltzer also shared his opinion that it's a tough time to expand the live schedule for AEW, with the live product being the coldest it's been since its debut, which I really do agree on. Now, the benefit of working house shows is that it gives talent the opportunity to work on things in front of a receptive crowd without the pressures of performing on live television, and gives valuable reps to talents who may not be used or being used on AEW television product. However, the issue is that in order to make these house shows worthwhile, you need to have some of your biggest stars on there to be available to wrestle to actually sell tickets. And Meltzer says it seems unlikely that the likes of Kenny Omega and Chris Jericho and other talent higher up on the card would be risked in non-televised productions. So it's a difficult one for AEW, that one. I mean, maybe they'll start running the occasional house show. The issue is that when AEW was set up, one of the biggest attractions for talent looking to sign with the company was that they didn't have house shows. They only worked TVs. That's where they made their money. Live events didn't really draw anymore, particularly for WWE. Even WWE were looking to change the live event situation for them. And they're still kind of working on that to an extent. And as Meltzer says, and it's very true, now isn't the time. If they expanded to house shows last year, in sort of August, September last year, where AEW was hot and they were doing good numbers and they were signing all of these people and people were excited about the product, I'd understand that. But now that's not the case. AEW is not red hot right now. It's still okay, and it's still drawing nearly 1 million viewers on Dynamite every single week. We'll talk about that later on. But at the same time, it's not red hot, and certainly I don't know if the demand's necessarily there to be running an extra couple of live events per week. I don't know if that's there. Again, as the report said earlier on about Jeff Jarrett, it might not be necessarily just for house shows. It's more about expanding into overseas markets, which Jarrett does have experience with, and possibly that's where he'll prove most beneficial. But it's going to be interesting to see what Double J has to offer when it comes to a corporate side of the company. Chris Jericho, of course, recently signed a new contract extension with AEW. We've got an update on his backstage role with AEW. On the latest episode of Ask Tony Anything, AEW senior producer and special advisor to talent Tony Schiavone spoke about Jericho's extension and his role as a leader backstage. Quote, he's just a kind of leader of the locker room, Shivani said. When we have locker room meetings, he kind of runs things. There's a number of athletes that he's kind of in charge of their creative. And other than that, he's just a guy that has a lot of clout. And because he has a lot of clout, when he says something, the wrestlers take it to heart. Shivani also acknowledged that he's not aware of any official change to Jericho's title in the company with this new deal, but that Jericho has certainly stepped up in recent months. Quote, call it the team captain for lack of a better word. So Jericho, I guess, is the de facto locker room leader, and in actuality, this is why it makes a lot of sense that he re-signed with AEW. He wouldn't have that role in WWE. He wouldn't. There are bigger people at play there. Jericho's got a ton of experience and is a legend, an icon in professional wrestling. But would he have that seniority in WWE? He'd have respect, but he wouldn't be, I don't know, a locker room leader in the company, and certainly wouldn't be a guy that runs a lot of things from the talent point of view. And maybe that's why Jericho's sticking around, because he's instrumental to AEW. Let's talk about Shibata, of course. Shibata is going to wrestle tonight on AEW Rampage. Katsuyori Shibata made his AEW return on Wednesday after Orange Cassidy successfully defended his title against Rey Fenix and Luchasaurus. Cassidy was going to be attacked by Pac. However, he was saved by Shibata, with the two set to battle for the All-Atlantic Championship tonight on the live edition of Rampage. It was reported that Shibata specifically wanted to work Orange Cassidy and Bryan Danielson at some point, and a further report from Dave Meltzer in the Wrestling Observer newsletter may have shed some light on the internal plans for the wrestler. Back at Forbidden Door in June, Shibata made his AEW debut, saving Cassidy from a beatdown from Will Ospreay, and the plan at the time was to run Shibata versus Cassidy at some point in time, with Meltzer saying the decision to run the match now was, quote, out of nowhere and deemed feasible by management. While Shibata asked for matches with Cassidy and Danielson, it's believed that Danielson was his definitive preference out of the two, and it remains to be seen if the two will indeed wrestle wrestle at any point. I would suggest that Danielson versus Shibata could happen, but maybe their point of view is we need time to build that up. It did certainly come out of nowhere, and Shibata wrestling on US television for the first time in gosh knows how many years is a really big deal. What was it, 3 years, 4 years? So it did seemingly come out of nowhere, but I'm really excited to see it tonight, absolutely. Talk about the ratings for Dynamite on Wednesday, and as expected, they're not too great. Despite some unexpected surprises and some big-name stars in title matches, Dynamite struggled to compete against the World Series and the NBA on Wednesday night. WrestleNomics shared the viewership information for Wednesday evening, and the November 2nd episode of Dynamite was watched by an average of 910,000 viewers overall, and a 9% drop from the previous week, and the lowest for the program since July 20 of this year. The key demographic numbers suffered even more. Dynamite was watched by 377,000 average viewers aged 18 to 49, totaling a 0.29 rating in the 18 to 49 demographic. That's the lowest the program has been at since the June 15 episode. But all that considered, despite the strong competition, Dynamite did remain in the top 3 for cable originals in the key demographic for broadcast primetime at place 17. The World Series game between the Philadelphia Phillies and the Houston Astros ran roughshod over competition with a 2.78 18 to 49 rating as Houston pitches through a combined no-hitter against Philadelphia. The only 2 programs to beat Dynamite in the cable originals category were the 2 NBA games. So, I mean, in comparison to a year ago, Dynamite is better in one category and worse in the other. Total viewership is up for 2022 as the November 3rd, 2021 episode was watched by 878,000 average viewers, 4% less than Wednesday. The key demographic number, though, that was down. Last year, Dynamite was watched by an average of 424,000 viewers, a 0.33 18 to 49 rating, which actually is 11% more than Wednesday night. So, look, whenever you have this strong sports competition, it's always going to be really, really difficult. And I think that's what we saw on Wednesday. And I think still remaining relatively close to that million mark, I think actually Dynamite, rather AEW, would be quite happy with that. Rick Ross was on Dynamite on Wednesday, and it was a really interesting and fun appearance. It was actually fantastic. He participated in a backstage segment with Swerve Strickland and Keith Lee to help set up an 8-man tag team match pitting Strickland, Lee, and the Gun Club against FTR and World Tag Team Champions The Acclaimed next week. Evidently, AEW's been trying to get Ross involved in some capacity for actually a really long time. Fightful Select reports that Grapsody's Will Washington first heard of a potential appearance from Ross on AEW programming. It's been in the works dating back to August. Also, the 2-minute interaction between Ross, Strickland, and Lee was done in only one take, signaling that AEW was actually very impressed with Ross's work. There was no mention made of any other appearances for Ross in AEW down the road just yet, but certainly it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it, and who knows, for a big pay-per-view, maybe he can come in for Full Gear. I thought it was a lot of fun, and it was a lot of fun to watch, certainly, on Wednesday night. We haven't seen a lot of Ricky Starks recently, and there's been some concern that he would be injured. Well, he's been announced for tonight's edition of Rampage, which is certainly good to see. Now, Starks has notably been absent from our screens, with his last televised appearance being on Dynamite back on September 28. As per Dave Meltzer in the latest Wrestling Observer newsletter, the reasoning behind Starks' absence from TV has been somewhat explained. He said, quote, Ricky Starks hasn't been in the ring for a few weeks due to something not wrestling related, but he'll be back on the show for a promo this week. So hopefully that kind of clears up any speculation on Starks being injured. His most recent prominent feud was with his tag team partner Powerhouse Hobbs. Hobbs defeated Starks during All Out on September 4. A rematch took place, billed as a lights out match during the Grand Slam edition of Rampage. The stipulation worked in Starks' favor as he defeated Hobbs, with the Rochambeau securing the pinfall victory. So it'll be interesting to see what he has planned for Rampage tonight. Finally, Bandido. We've got the latest on Bandido. It feels like a lifetime since he had that match against Chris Jericho and was offered that contract, and still feels like it was up in the air. An update has now finally emerged on Bandido's status, as per Dave Meltzer in the Wrestling Observer newsletter, saying, quote, the only thing I was told regarding Bandido is that he had verbally agreed to terms and everyone was going with the idea he was coming in. But nobody could confirm if he's actually put pen to paper, but we've basically been told he's considered in. Which is interesting because that's basically what we heard a couple of weeks ago, is that he was basically in, but he hadn't put pen to paper. Fightful said that he was basically in. Now, Dave Meltzer is saying he's basically in, but we don't have any definitive update, and we haven't had his All Elite graphic yet, so we'll have to wait and see. But there you go, guys. That's the latest AEW news for you. Be sure to smash a like on the like button. Be sure to subscribe bottom right-hand corner. Let me know your thoughts on today's AEW news stories in the comment section below, and I'll speak for you again very, very soon. Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.